I would like to see a country that's taken a real step forward in building a stronger economy and find our voice in the world. We've lost our voice. I want us to find that voice. I think we have something to offer the rest of the world as long as we get our act together back home.
Welcome to the Conservative Journal. I'm Brianna Sawyers. My guest today is the Honourable Jean Charest, candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Welcome, Mr. Charest.
Thank you, Brianna.
You married young, just shy of your 22nd birthday. You quickly entered into politics. Since then, you've been elected 8 times, served as cabinet minister, party leader, re-elected twice as premier of Quebec.
Yep.
Why do you want to do this?
Well, it's a very good question, obviously. The common thread of my whole political life, Brianna, has been the idea of Canada. And I think being a citizen of this country is like winning the lottery, for all of us, literally. And I see the country divided between East, West, rural and urban Canadians and new Canadians, and intergenerationally. I see a country whose economic potential is way below what it should be, and no plans for economic growth, and a country whose voice on the international stage is much diminished. And Canadians now look at all of this, they see the same things that you and I see. And they ask themselves, are the Conservatives going to be the answer? Are we going to be the national party, able to replace the Liberals, or are we going to do like in 19 and 21 and fail in the election campaign and re-elect Mr. Trudeau? So I want to be the leader of the party that will be able to unite that party, offer a national alternative, get the country to work together, united, but also allow us to do much bigger things than what we're doing now.
So the big issue at the dinner table these days is the cost of living. What happened and how can we fix it?
There's a whole host of reasons. There are 2 things that we can do to address inflation. One is control spending, because that feeds into inflation. Coming out of COVID, we spent a lot. Now it's time to clean up the balance sheet and put together a plan to return to balance. And the second thing we could do is what I did in Quebec during the Great Recession of 08 and 09, and that's reduce income taxes, which allows people to have more disposable income and to be able to have more money in their pockets as opposed to having it eaten away by inflation. Those are 2 things that are within our grasp that we could do.
Okay. I imagine a 22-year-old person looking forward, and what would you say to them about a future that just seems out of reach?
You know, when you're young and you look at the world and you look at some of the challenges, it always, from generation to generation, looks sometimes like something that's overwhelming. It is not. Every single generation's been able to meet those challenges. But we need to make the right choices. For someone who's young, you need to have good training, good education. You need to live in a place where there's going to be prosperity, there's going to be economic growth, and that should be Canada. This is the place where you should make your life. And in fact, that's what a whole lot of people around the world believe. So look at areas in which, there's going to be growth in terms of jobs, and interesting and good jobs, and doing the things you like. So for a young person today in Canada, I want to build a country where they can feel very optimistic about the future. I'm not into the politics of anger or tearing down institutions and firing people. I mean, that can only go so far, Brianna. In the end, it has to be about bigger things that we're going to build together. That's what I want.
Anyone on a fixed income is scared. What would you say to them?
Well, we need a government that's going to be very disciplined in cleaning up our finances and making sure that if you're on a fixed income, that we're able to control inflation in particular, because that's what's eating into your ability to maintain your standard of living. And other things that we should do to ensure that people who are fixed incomes, that are older, who are going to need health care services, that those services will be there for them. when they require them at one point in their life. So we need a government able to anticipate and think ahead. On healthcare, for example, I'm proposing to open up the Canada Health Act, which is a sacred cow. I want the provinces to have the ability to innovate and even allow the private sector to deliver services, maintain a single payer. No one will put their hand in their pocket for services, but to have a system that's more efficient, more cost efficient, and will be there for older Canadians who are on fixed incomes and who will need those services eventually.
The price of gas is skyrocketing, and no thanks to the carbon tax. Is that tax really needed?
I would do away from the carbon tax of Mr. Trudeau because it's a consumption tax on Canadians. There are better ways of dealing with this. Climate is an important issue. The environment's an important issue. It's an issue I know well. I was in the government. I had the delegation that signed the Climate Change Convention in '92 in Rio. Now, what I would do is focus instead on the technologies we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That includes carbon capture and storage, green, blue hydrogen, biofuels, small modular reactors, and alternative energies. I would do away with Mr. Trudeau's consumption tax on carbon, and I would replace it with a price on carbon for large emitters. And that's what we've done in Quebec with a carbon trading system with California. I'm the one who put that in place. And Alberta has been doing that since 2002. It's more efficient. It is, I think it's fair, and it allows us to meet our objectives of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in a more economic way and in a smarter way.
So let's talk about taxes. Why was it important to you to keep the tax rate down and not just for the top income earners? What's the benefit for everyone?
More economic growth is that's what will really happen if you reduce taxes and do it in a way that's very fair. What I did in Quebec is we did a number of things. First of all, on family policy, we reestablished family allowances that were non-taxable and weighed them in favor of low-income families and single-parent families, which had a dramatic impact on reducing poverty. And then in 08-09, we reduced personal income taxes during the Great Recession. And the credit rating agency says that's one of the reasons why Quebec had a better economic performance than the rest of Canada, the United States, or Europe. Lower unemployment and more economic growth. And we weighted again in favor of middle-class families and lower-income families in Quebec. And that money channels right back into the economy when you get it right. And when I left office, Quebecers were paying on average $1 billion less in the total take-in taxes and had a higher disposable income. So you can get more growth. If you're smart about that, if you are measured in the way you do it, you get more growth, more jobs out of your economy if you're balanced in the way you deal with taxes.
And we can't forget about parents. Talk to me about your childcare tax credit.
Quebec had this very developed daycare policy, universal daycare. I was skeptical, and you know what? I was wrong. What I saw instead, if you do it right, is that you allow women who are of working age between 25 and 54 choices to enter the labor market. One of the most important obstacles in a decision to have children is both the accessibility and affordability of daycare. And so what we saw was quite remarkable. Quebec women went from one of the lowest ranks in Canada of labor participation to one of the highest rates in the world. It reduced poverty, increased productivity, increased the revenue of families, and it dealt also with labor shortages that we have. So across the country, there's a number of things I would do. First of all, I would maintain the agreements that have been signed between the federal government and the provinces. All provinces, including Conservative governments, have done that. I would add a tax credit and increase it for Canadians who choose to be outside of the public system. For parental leave, I would extend it to 2 years. I would take the federal or the equivalent of the federal tax off of parental leave, and I would allow a parent on parental leave to earn up to $20,000 without being clawed back to reintegrate the labor market. Again, the idea here, Brianna, is that you create policies that allow people to make choices and return into the labor market, as opposed to programs that are an obstacle to making that happen.
Okay, moving away from taxes now. Is Quebec really a conservative province?
Ah, that's a very interesting question. You know what I've seen in my years in politics? On the issue of fiscal conservatism, Canadians are of the same mind. It's very interesting to see. I know I was Premier of Quebec, and I'm a fiscal conservative, always was and always will be. Canadians, no matter where they live, and it includes Quebec, they want their governments to balance their budgets, they want them to control spending, they want them to be transparent, and they don't want any adventurism. Canadians are not into adventurism. They want us to be very conservative, not in the partisan sense of the word, but in the definition of the word that speaks to what it is to be prudent, prudent managers of other people's money. And that's true in Quebec. It's very true. And Quebecers want strong economic growth, which is another value. They believe in a market-based economy. That's a conservative value. They believe in families, plural, all kinds of families. And Quebecers also believe in the rule of law, a very strong conservative value. And that Quebecers have also something in common with Western Canadians, a strong belief in a federalism that respects the jurisdictions of the provinces, which is what conservatives have always stood for. So are Quebecers conservatives? I think they are. Have they been offered that choice? No, not in the last election campaign. You know, there are 32 Bloc MPs in the House of Commons from Quebec, 32. And you're looking at their retirement plan, by the way. I will retire all 32 of them if I become leader of the Conservative Party. And why are they there? Because people in Quebec felt they didn't want Mr. Trudeau, and they didn't like what the Conservatives were offering. So your question is bang on. They are Conservatives as long as they have a real conservative choice. And that's exactly what I intend to offer them.
Has the separatism question been answered, or is it still in play?
They will never go away. They will never go away. No, and it'll ebb and flow. And that's why we can't take anything for granted, and we should not. And it doesn't have the same, it doesn't resonate the same way today as it did in the 60s or the 70s, and because the world has changed. And but now, if we look at the issue of national unity, when I talk about that, I'm thinking more about Alberta, where people in Alberta are very unhappy. They feel that they're not acknowledged, they're not recognized, and the talk of separatism is coming out of Alberta, which I hope will never, of course, happen.
Let's talk about the energy policy.
Well, this is a key issue for the future of the country. Economic growth depends on our ability to develop our resources: oil, gas, pipelines, mining, forestry, agriculture, agri-food. And for the oil and gas industry, we should take a hard look at where we are now. With the experience of this war in Ukraine, there's two things that are very evident now. One is security of supply, which no one thinks about unless there's a crisis, but governments should think about. And it's been made clearly evident to us now in this country that if we don't ensure that we have security of supply, we're like everyone else, our sovereignty is threatened. Two is that had we had our act together, we could be a source of supply of oil and gas to Europe, as opposed to watching them fund Russia by buying oil and gas to invade Ukraine. I mean, it's cruel. It's heartbreaking to watch that happen. But for that to happen, Brianna, there's something that, it may sound trivial, it's not. And there's no big projects that happen unless the Prime Minister stands up and says, this is important and we need to do it. Mr. Trudeau never did that on any pipelines. He never did that on any big project. And the reason I say that, I know from experience, no big project happens unless someone grabs it and defends it and runs with it, because they're not easy to get done. But if leadership is missing, we end up where we are now. And that's why people want a change of government. The last pipeline built in Quebec was built under my government. It was built between Lévis and Longueuil. And you know what? When we announced it, it was very clear that we were going to do it. There was no doubt that we were going to do it. The question was, how do we do it to make it right? But no one in their mind, including whether it was the environment groups or people along the route, had any doubt of what our determination was. And that's what's required if you're going to do big projects.
A tough question here. Should we be tearing down statues of people like Sir John A?
I am offended by the idea that we would tear down those statues. And I saw it happen in Montreal, and the very park in which we had the 95 rally, where there was a statue of Sir John A. My son and I, Antoine, who both of us are big fans of Sir John A., wrote a chapter in a book about Georges-Étienne Cartier, who was his Quebec lieutenant, and the relationship he had with Sir John A. and the role they played. And what this is about is writing history backwards. You cannot write history backwards. We should be able to recognize that their decisions and their lives were in a different context. The rights of women, the rights of minorities, or indigenous rights, of course. I mean, the context was very different. We shouldn't let them off for the bad decisions they made, but we should also account and have the ability to account for the context in which they worked. Sir John A. Macdonald is Canada's, founding father, an extraordinary man, and who allowed this country to be what it is today. And it offends me that we would tear down his statue. I think it offends the concept of decency and honesty in regards to how we deal with our own history.
Repeat offenders and increase in violence is a hot topic.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
I would give you an example. I put out a policy where I would allow Crown attorneys the option to lay a charge for a minimum sentence, depending on the circumstances of a case. So there's a nuance there. It wouldn't be automatic. It would be the Crown attorney's judgment, but they would have the tool to do that, which is important because there are circumstances where, frankly, we should not allow people to get away with committing crimes without a minimum sentence. And then I would increase the sentences and sanctions for hate crimes. And I would also increase and make it a criminal act for those who are aggressors on police officers or firemen or first responders or nurses and doctors and social workers within our system. So yes, we have to be tough on crime. I'm worried about guns in cities, handguns. I think that's the issue on guns in this country, not the Trudeau, baiting conservatives on other issues for guns. And that's true in every big city right now in Canada. Montreal used to think a few years ago that it was someone else's problem. They'd be smug about it. Toronto, or what? There are shootings in daylight now in Montreal. And it has become a huge problem that I would attack vigorously by putting together a special unit of the RCMP to deal with handguns in cities.
Are we stepping up to our NATO obligation? And are we keeping an eye on our northern border? After all, we border Russia.
Yes. We're derelict in our responsibility towards the Arctic and have been for a long time now. And the war in Ukraine is a wake-up call. We need to respect this commitment we made to have 2% of our GDP invested in defense. We can't do that overnight because the type of spending we're going to do is very serious spending on either submarines or... And for the Arctic, I'm very worried and have been for a long time. We did a plan called Plan A because part of Quebec goes into the Arctic. And that was one of the issues. And with climate change, there's two new commercial routes that are opening in the Arctic. There's the northern route controlled by the Russians, now militarized, and that's the easiest of the routes, which they said they would not militarize, but they have. And then there's the Northwest Passage that belongs to Canada. But here's a good example of how we have to review our foreign policy. It is ours. It belongs to us. But the Americans do not recognize the Northwest Passage as being Canada's. Neither does Europe. So even our allies are not going to give us a pass on our own sovereignty. This is urgent. I would open 2 military bases in the Arctic, one with a deep sea water port, and I would move very rapidly to make that happen. We need to buy new submarines, and submarines that are able to navigate the Arctic cap. And we need to modernize the radar system with our American allies through NORAD. And we need to increase the number of troops, which is going to be a huge challenge because we have labor shortages to start with, and recruiting is going to be important, but we have to find incentives to make that happen and treat our veterans better than we're treating them now. So that's part of the package on defense that I would put forward.
Yes. So 10 years from now, after you've left office, Prime Minister, what will people be saying about your government?
I'd like to see a country that is able to offer its citizens a good, solid standard of living and find our voice in the world. We've lost our voice. I was part of a government that had a strong voice. We fought apartheid in South Africa. I saw a Prime Minister go head-to-head with Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Not in a hostile way, but because we as Canadians felt strongly that this is unfair. This should not be allowed to stand, this apartheid. I saw a government, rally support for Desert Storm in '92, this intervention in Iraq, and do trade agreements with the United States and Mexico and a Clean Air Act with the United States. I want us to find that voice. I think we have something to offer the rest of the world as long as we get our act together back home.
Thank you, Mr. Charest, and all the best on your campaign.
Thank you, Brianna.